All right, let's jump into quiz number 3. This one's about synchronization, which is probably not why you signed up for this class, but it's important, and I think we're gonna cover it, and you will find it useful in a lot of situations you want it to be happening. But let's get to the questions. So what identifies the exact position in a recorded media? That's the time code. So there are several different time codes. We're going to talk about a couple of them right now. Probably the most famous, the widest spread, is called SMPTE, which stands for the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. And it will often use something called drop frame, where it will end up being not 30 frames per second, but it will be 29.997 frames per second. And I'm going to resist telling that whole story. But the thing to know is that why do we bother with that? It's because if you didn't use drop frame, then the time code readout would be different from the actual elapsed time, right? Once you got 2 or 3 minutes in, it would not be the exact same second as the actual amount of seconds that had passed. Good. So there's a thing called MIDI timecode, which was developed by electronic musicians. It actually turns out to be kind of expensive to work with all of this, the SMPTE stuff, but you can do a version of it that is just MIDI based, and that was a lot cheaper, and that's all that electronic musicians needed when they were working just inside of the box. There's a thing called an offset. Now you can use that offset when you're synchronizing devices that do not all start at the beginning of the song at 0000, right? You can set an offset, say, for the chorus part to wait 1 minute and 13 seconds and then start to play, or whatever it is. Okay, so you do need some sort of linear time code, LTC, to do these synchronizations in your audio productions, some way, and often it's just going to be in our DAW, and we don't have to think about it too much until it breaks. There's a thing called crosstalk, which is when a signal will bleed over onto a track next to it. This is a lot more of an analog tape problem, more so than in Pro Tools or Logic or whatever DAW you're working with. They're not, just because they're next to each other, they're not going to be bleeding into one another. But that is a thing that would happen in analog tape. And I guess I referenced this earlier, the MIDI timecode in digital systems, they will, their timecode, if they use the MIDI timecode, the cost is greatly reduced, right? It's just ones and zeros as long as they're moving along at the right time. That's all we really need. You don't have to spend extra money on and burn up resources just to keep everything in sync. All right, now let me take an extra minute to talk about this. Let's get the answer out of the way first. Is that your DAW, it can act as the synchronizer or the synchronizee. I've got it in here saying as the master or the follower. It can do either one of those things. Now, I want to talk about this because it's in the book, and it's an issue that is ongoing. The words that have often been used have been master and slave. And when I went to school, we all kind of winced and looked at each other, and the teacher was like, it's not a big deal, that's just the words that we use. And there are still a lot of those people in the industry, but I think its time has come that we're really trying to look into a better terminology that we would like to use for the synchronizer and the synchronizee, or the leader and the follower, or whatever it's going to end up being as. All right. Lastly, though, if you are in doubt as to what the frame rate is, if it is 30 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 24 frames, 29.97 drop frame, what you really got to do is ask. Make sure you ask somebody. These in particular that I'm doing right now, they have a strange frame rate, and I just go with it because it works. So the real reason, like the kangaroo says, at these prices I'm not surprised.